Thomas arrived home after another job interview, upset that he had not been invited back. He found his wife Linda in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Hi, honey, how did it go?" she asked. Thomas paused, not knowing how to break the news of another setback. He had already been looking for a new job for a month after being laid off, but he didn't want to upset his wife. "Oh, it went well," he replied. "They said they'd call back by the end of the week." Linda looked at him with concern. "You know, I saw a job opening at your company yesterday that I'm a good fit for." "I think I might give it a try," Thomas added. His wife pressed her lips together and looked at him apprehensively. "You want us to work at the same place?" she asked. "Do you think that's a good idea?" Thomas smiled and reassured her. "Why not? We'll have the same schedule, commute to work together, and even have the same downtime. We'll finally be able to take vacations at the same time." Linda frowned and turned away from the stove. "Well, only if it's a yes," she said. Her husband didn't quite understand her reaction, but had already decided to send his resume to the company. He was tired of rejections and wanted to get back to work. A week later, Thomas received an invitation to his first interview, which he successfully passed. The second stage was more difficult, but he still beat the competition. Finally, he received a tempting offer for a good position in a branch of a large firm. Wanting to celebrate this event, he bought a cake, champagne, and went home. Linda had just returned from work when Thomas told her the happy news. "Linda, I've been accepted," he exclaimed, unwrapping a treat on the table. Linda's joy seemed a little contrived, and Thomas noticed it immediately. "Linda, what's wrong? Why are you upset?" he asked. Sighing heavily, Linda shared her concerns. She worried that being around each other all the time might lead to frequent quarrels and that they would grow tired of each other. "We won't have anything to talk about," she said. "And when coworkers find out we're married, silly jokes and gossip can start, as it did for people I know when they were in a similar situation with their spouses." Thomas reassured his wife by putting his arm around her shoulders. "We're not going to let that happen. If it will make you feel better, let's ask our superiors to keep our marriage private. Let's keep our relationship professional at work," he assured her. Linda calmed down and they sat down to eat cake and champagne. However, she refused champagne, citing a headache. Contrary to her fears, their life began to get better. Thomas liked his new job. The staff seemed friendly, always ready to help in any disputes. Nastya, although she worked in another part of the office, still sometimes saw Thomas. This distance was to their advantage, because they had agreed to keep their relationship a secret. Months passed until one day Thomas needed to take some documents to the accountant. On his way to the office, he glanced at his wife's workplace, but she was not there. He looked around the room and finally spotted her. She was leaning over the desk where a man was sitting. Her foot was resting on his leg, and she was pointing at some papers, maintaining eye contact and smiling. It was obvious that the man perceived her as more than just a coworker. The sight alarmed Thomas and raised many questions in his mind. At that moment, one of his coworkers approached him and patted him on the shoulder. Thomas asked, "By the way, who is Linda talking to?" The coworker replied with a laugh, "That's Ralph, the head of her department. He came to us a little earlier than you, but he has already managed to make an impression." Thomas was puzzled. "What do you mean?" The colleague grinned again and said, "You still have a lot to learn, but it is better to learn it informally." With these words, he returned to his desk, leaving Thomas anxious. What were all these vague answers and strange jokes? Thomas decided to observe Ralph. He seemed comfortable in his position, socializing with the other employees and exuding confidence, sometimes bordering on arrogance. Sometimes you could hear him giving orders and advice in an imperious tone. The women in the office were attracted to him either because of his status or because of his charm. They would ask him for advice, smile sweetly, and thank him profusely for his help. Afterward, they would gather around the water cooler, glance in his direction, and engage in lively conversations. Thomas did not want to disregard the words of his colleague, as he felt he still had much to learn. He was ready, and the opportunity soon presented itself. On Friday afternoon, Char called for everyone to gather in the meeting room to make an announcement to the entire office. "We are having a huge annual company party at a restaurant downtown," Char announced. "Not only our office, but several other branches from neighboring cities will be attending. It's going to be a grand event. Let's show our camaraderie." Everyone rejoiced at the news and enthusiastically discussed the upcoming event before returning to their workstations. Thomas, however, remained wary. Could a corporate event really take place in such an informal setting? He could not recall anything remarkable in Linda's behavior after previous events, even though she had been with the company for 6 years. During the evening drive, Paul discussed the upcoming party with his wife. "This year we can finally attend a company party together," he suggested. In response, his wife sighed reluctantly. "There's usually nothing interesting there. The bosses give speeches, and it's just a bunch of boredom. You won't lose anything if you don't go." Thomas found her answer odd, and he cast a meaningful glance at her, hoping to see some sign of nervousness. "Strange, I've always heard you like it," he remarked. "I only go because it counts as participation in company events, which affects promotions," she explained dryly. "Let's go check out the store. We're out of milk." Thomas hesitated. Over the years, his wife had always carefully prepared for the company party and returned home in good spirits. But now she was making such disparaging statements. Obviously, there was something fishy going on here. The only option left was to follow his plan that he had already prepared for the day of the corporate party. The wife was not in the mood, but reluctantly got ready and put on makeup. The husband noticed the change in Linda's behavior and decided to play along. He pretended to have eaten something spoiled, complaining of stomach pain and nausea. Linda went to the medicine cabinet and pulled out some pills for her husband. He remarked, "Well, I guess it's my fate to sit at home while you go to a party. Have fun without me, but don't die of boredom." He tried to smile, but his wife frowned at his remark and told him to get well soon. Then she quickly began packing her things, hiding her quiet joy. The plan had worked. Thomas waited a couple hours before heading to the event. By then, he figured the official part would be over. He caught a cab and drove to the restaurant where the party was being held. As he entered the room, he was surprised at the number of people who had come. It wasn't just their office that was represented here. He started walking around the hall, looking for his wife in the crowd. He went to the appetizer table and decided to watch from there, running through various scenarios in his head of what might happen. His thoughts were interrupted by the conversation of his colleagues standing nearby. They were discussing Linda. "I wonder what Linda will do this time," the tall brunette said. "She doesn't know how to handle alcohol, and it always shows." The young guy grinned, quoting a recent speech. "She'll probably start flirting with someone new, like she used to with Ralph," the girl summarized. It all became clear to Thomas. That's what he was about to find out. Thomas felt anger rising in him. He had to look around more carefully to confirm the words of his colleagues. Soon he saw everything. Linda was dancing vigorously with Ralph, the head of their department. She was obviously having a good time. Later they sat down at the table and clinked glasses. Ralph leaned over and whispered something in Linda's ear, causing her to smile and nod back. There was not a hint of surprise or discomfort on her face during their interaction. It was obvious that their relationship went beyond mere professional communication. He quickly finished his drink and took her hand and led her away from the room. Thomas followed. The couple walked down the hallway and turned to the far door. After waiting a moment, Thomas stepped into the room. The situation matched the description of his colleagues. The wife was lying on the table and her dress was at her lover's feet, disregarding social conventions and possible consequences. Thomas rushed toward the smug Ralph and delivered a powerful blow to his face. Ralph, who seemed unaccustomed to such strong blows, did not make the slightest attempt to defend himself. He fell to the floor and crawled away from the enraged man. Thomas' gaze then shifted to his wife, who was staring fearfully at her lover. The wife was crying uncontrollably and could not utter a word. Ralph, still wiping the blood from his face with his sleeve, slowly stood up without touching her. What insolence is this? Thomas swung at him, but he managed to deflect the blow. "That's my wife. You little puppy. Back off if you don't want to get the same thing." Fear appeared on Ralph's face. He didn't seem to know about his coworker's marital status, or maybe he didn't know that her husband had joined their company. That evening, Linda did not return home, and in the morning her friends came for her things. She was ashamed to look into the eyes of her husband. She realized that it was useless to ask for forgiveness. Thomas could never forgive such a betrayal. They divorced, and he left the company of his own accord. He wanted nothing more to do with those deceitful people. He found a job at another company where the atmosphere was much nicer, but he consciously avoided getting involved in the corporate world again.